Clouds of locusts have been covering fields across East Africa, destroying much-needed crops. Kenya is one of the most affected countries and is experiencing its worst invasion in 70 years. Farmer Mwende Kimanzi says the insects have eaten almost all her crops since they landed in her field 2 weeks ago. Planes started spraying pesticides as soon as they were spotted, but that's had a limited impact.
I had managed to only harvest 1 bag of millet and lentils each. The rest of the crops were all destroyed.
The mother of 3 usually sells the lentils and keeps the millet for her family.
There is nothing left. We will still face hunger.
Some 19 million people across the region are already facing severe food insecurity. The situation has been made even worse by the desert locusts, which have destroyed tens of thousands of hectares of farmland. The UN says a swarm of 40 million can consume as much food as 35,000 people eat in a day. It's appealed to countries to donate $76 million to help affected countries combat the outbreak. But so far, it's only received a quarter of that amount.
It's time for the international community to understand that it is an issue that needs to be dealt with now. Otherwise, we will turn a situation of a plague. There will be high level of acute food insecurity. There will be million more people that will require food assistance, and it will take us years to control this situation.
First sighted in Africa in December, the plagues also reached southern Asia, where Pakistan declared a national emergency. And while officials in India say they've gained control of the swarms, for many farmers, help came too late.
My family's anise field could have harvested 2,000 kilograms of anise seed this year, but the harvest was totally ruined by the locusts, costing me about $5,600. After the locusts swarmed, you see, it has become a wasteland.
The desert locusts can multiply 20 times in 3 months in favorable conditions such as high temperatures and humidity. With rain expected soon, their numbers could jump 500 times by June, threatening even more livelihoods on either side of the Arabian Sea. Sibel Karkus, TRT World.
Well, for more, I'm joined by Crystal Wells in Nairobi. She's the spokeswoman for the International Committee of the Red Cross in Africa. Welcome to Money Talks, Crystal. Now, the RCRC has been closely monitoring this plague of locusts long before it made international headlines. Can you just tell us, how has this progressed and how bad is it now?
It's a very troubling situation. And I think when you look at the current outbreak, you really have to put it into context of what people have dealt with in the past year. 2019 was really a tumultuous year for Eastern Africa. The region seesawed between droughts and floods. And with each of these climate shocks, people obviously lost more of their crops, more of their ability to grow food. And on top of that, a number of the countries who were affected, 3 of them in particular, Ethiopia, South Sudan, and Somalia, are also countries that experience violence or conflict. So it's not uncommon that we see people who've been, on the run, fleeing clashes and losing everything they have from being displaced by clashes, to then settle somewhere else and lose everything to a drought, and to lose everything to a flood. And for families to now face a locust invasion is really yet another blow on top of a year where they did face really disaster on top of disaster on top of disaster.
And do we know how the governments of these various countries that are affected, how are they dealing with it? What measures are being implemented?
Yeah, I mean, I think you saw a bit of that with the piece you just showed. The UN, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN, has been really leading on prevention efforts with the governments to control them, and that really does need to be the priority right now. It's a bit hard to even say what the true scale of this emergency could be. We at the ICRC, our fear is that if they're not contained and if they continue to spread and continue to breed and their eggs hatch, it could hit this region at a really important planting season. People often, start to really cultivate in March and April, and if they're spreading during that period of time, there's a good chance that they could really feast on crops that are just starting to germinate, which would obviously have devastating impacts on communities later in the year when people would be typically ready to harvest. And I just think about countries like South Sudan and Somalia, where genuinely people struggle to have food on a day to day basis. This would be absolutely devastating for people.
And do we know if there's an end in sight here? Do experts predict, or can they predict, when the locusts might simply die off or move on?
I mean, I certainly can't. I think we fear that there have been new eggs laid and that there is a potential for new swarms to come. So basically, if these, prevention and control measures don't work, and if the conditions are favorable for these eggs to hatch, essentially that the ground is moist and more swarms are allowed to form, we really could see very large scale crop losses later in the year. And again, our fear is really on these communities that are already so fragile because of violence or conflict.
Well, let's hope the worst is over. Crystal Wells from the ICRC in Africa, thank you so much for your time.